Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us today. Welcome to session number 7B, Fostering Positive Food Relationships. And today we're going to be hearing from Grace Bell, and we are flying through this conference, right? So I want to introduce myself briefly before we begin. My name is Kylie Regan, and I'm a family support specialist at AFFCNY, and I'm going to be your moderator for this Zoom room today. So I want to quickly also remind everyone that training certificates are available for this conference. And so right after I give my spiel, I'm going to put the links for requests in the chat box below. I'm also going to include 2 other links for guiding you to our book table fundraiser and as well as the conference workshop evaluations. And these are incredibly helpful for us as we move forward. So, and please know if you have any questions during this workshop, please feel free to put them also in the chat. Unless, of course, Grace specifically asks for people to unmute themselves to ask questions out loud. But I will keep everyone muted for now so that we can all hear the speaker clearly. So with that, let's get started. I don't have anything else to share, so the floor is yours, Grace.
Awesome. Welcome to Fostering Positive Food Relationships. My name is Grace. I am a clinical nutrition intern and I practice out of Putnam County. The focus of my work is the impact trauma has on nutrition behaviors and nutrition status and chronic health conditions. I'm also a former foster youth, adoptee, and foster parent. As far as the chat goes, there'll be some audience engagement. So please, use the chat for answers. And if you have any questions for me, and I will try to take a peek at it. So what we'll be covering for the next hour is looking at how trauma impacts food-related behaviors. I separated the workshop into 2 sections. The first section, we're going to be looking at the importance of meeting nutrition requirements in relation to cognitive development. And the second section, we'll be looking at what will increase or decrease allostatic load, affecting the long-term health of children in care, and how to recognize trauma at the table, and how we can begin addressing these behaviors through connection. Our ultimate goal is to help our children create relationships with food that promote long-term health. So before we dig into nutrition behaviors, I would like to set the scene for why nutrition is important to cognitive health, especially with our children. Just a quick overview of nutrition. It's separated into 2 groupings, macronutrients and micronutrients. Our macronutrients are what a lot of people tend to focus on, what are carbs, fats, proteins, and that's at the basic level, that's our fuel. And our micronutrients or vitamins and minerals would be kind of like our spark plugs. They are the coenzymes or cofactors to processes in the body. And if you compare it to a car, you can have a full tank of gas, but if you don't have all your spark plugs working in line, either your car is not going to run very well or it's not going to run at all. And micronutrients are especially important because micronutrients are often dependent on other micronutrients for their own metabolism. A good example of this, and I use this example because we'll be talking about it later on in the slides, is that B6 and folate are dependent on zinc for absorption. So if you have a zinc deficiency, that can lead to a secondary deficiency in B6 or folate. There are many nutrients that play an important role in supporting a healthy nervous system, but I'm going to focus on the nutrient insufficiencies and deficiencies that we tend to see in children coming into care. So can anybody give some examples of maybe some symptoms that we would see with depression, anxiety, trauma? You can put your answers in the chat. Is there a way to make the chat move up and down? I don't have a cursor to do that. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry.
Were you able to figure it out?
Yep, thank you. Wonderful. Stomach ache, overeating, lethargy, yeah. Sleeplessness, headaches, anger, yeah. Irritable, stress, yeah. Those are all great examples, and they are absolutely symptoms of these conditions. They are also symptoms, cognitive symptoms of certain nutrient deficiencies, such as iron, zinc, specifically B12, B6, vitamin D, magnesium, and the omega-3s. If you look at this, you see we have fatigue, difficulty concentrating, irritability, excitability, memory, recall issues. So the comparison here is not that these are the cause of the depressive or anxiety symptoms, but that if your child has a clinical diagnosis and they are insufficient or deficient in these particular nutrients, are we adding fuel to the fire by adding to the same symptoms, just multiplying it? So some of the nutrients we're going to cover, the first three in bold are the ones that we see insufficient or deficient in children coming into care. And the B vitamins and omegas are important to supporting nervous system function. And I think it's important if we're talking about mental health and nervous system function that we talk about the gut-brain axis. This is also important because children have a higher nutrient turnover due to growth rates and therefore need consistent intake of certain nutrients. So looking at iron, both zinc and iron are important to growth and development in children, especially brain development. Prolonged iron deficiency can increase ADHD symptoms and increase learning challenges. Iron is essential for transporting oxygen to the tissues throughout the body. It's important for energy production in the mitochondria, and it's important for neurological development. That's why we can see learning, memory, and behavior issues in deficient children. Maternal iron deficiency anemia can result in impaired cognitive and behavioral development in infants, and childhood anemia can lead to psychomotor and cognitive abnormalities and learning difficulties. And some research suggests that the cognitive effects of anemia in childhood can follow into adulthood with neurological and cognitive issues that last long after the deficiency has been corrected. So that just reiterates the need for a consistent intake. Iron is also important because it's a cofactor for enzymes involved in neurotransmitter synthesis. Also, a review found that 7.4% of children ages 3 months to 6 years were anemic upon coming into foster care, which is more than double the national prevalence. And anemic can be either iron deficiency anemia or even vitamin deficiency anemia. They both affect the blood, but iron deficiency is really important for brain health. And I thought it was really interesting. They also noted that the catch-up growth we see with kids when they come into care due to just kind of meeting the needs may not be enough because now they're also in a state of growth. So they may actually need more. So we had talked about zinc and iron both being important to growth and development, and especially in the brain. And zinc is important. It's found largely in the brain, specifically the hippocampus, so we can think of memory and mood. And it's stored in the synapses and regulates synaptic plasticity. Adequate zinc increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is what promotes nerve growth, adaptation, and repair, and is important to a healthy nervous system. Decreased zinc or zinc deficiency leads to decreased zinc in the synapses, and decreased zinc in the synapses leads to increased response to glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. Additionally, zinc deficiency leads to decreased GABA, our inhibitor in this nervous system, as well as we spoke of before, BDNF and nerve growth factor. And all three of these are needed to support a healthy nervous system. So we have decrease in what we need for a healthy nervous system and an excited response that can lead to excitotoxicity in the brain. which has been associated with migraines, anxiety, seizures, depression, and bipolar disorder. Low serum zinc levels are seen in depression, and zinc supplementation has shown to have some antidepressant effects, but especially when working synergistically with antidepressant therapies that have not produced desired results. Vitamin D, our sunshine vitamin, is most known for its role in bone mineralization, but it's also involved in immune function, inflammation regulation, and has a role in brain development and function. There are vitamin D receptors found in almost all your bodily cells, but that includes the brain neurons and glial cells. A study found that the vitamin D receptors and the enzyme needed to convert vitamin D to its active form were found throughout the brain with strongest expression in the hypothalamus. So we can think of emotions and sleep cycle, and the substantia nigra, which is a region that's been implicated in neuropsychiatric disorders. And so when we combine this with the role in inflammation and immune health and its role in the brain, we can link that with neuroinflammation, which has short-term and long-term impacts on brain health. So we had talked before about vitamin deficiency anemia, and the three vitamins that are associated with that are B6, folate, and B12. And not only are these three important to neurocognitive function, they're also frequently found to be deficient together in some form. And homocysteine levels are regulated by B6, folate, and B12. So as we discussed at the beginning of the presentation, folate and B6 are dependent on zinc for absorption. So if we have the zinc deficiency, we can be deficient in either of these vitamins. And decreased B6 and folate means that B12 cannot convert homocysteine to methionine, and increased homocysteine levels are associated with decreased mental function. B6 is also important because it's found in the brain at 100 times the level found in the blood, and it is a required coenzyme for our neurotransmitters, GABA, dopamine, serotonin, glutamate, and norepinephrine. A study found that B12 deficiency is associated with depressive symptoms, and studies found that around 30% of people hospitalized for depression are deficient in B12. So not necessarily a causal factor, but it's an interesting association. So our omega-3 fatty acids are essential fatty acids, meaning that we have to get them through our diet. Our bodies do not make them. And they're well known for their cardioprotective and anti-inflammatory effects, but they're also neuroprotective as well. And as we said before, neuroinflammation has been linked to cognitive decline. Of the omega-3s, DHA is most important for brain health as it readily crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it's highly concentrated in the brain. It's essential for the composition of the membrane phospholipids of the brain cells and maintains structural integrity of those cell membranes and promotes healthy neuronal function. Observational studies have correlated maternal DHA intake during pregnancy and lactation with healthy brain development and overall health in infants. And potentially that accumulation of DHA continues into the second year of life. Low levels of DHA have been associated with brain fog, lack of mental clarity, memory and recall issues, but low levels of EPA were strongly associated with depression. So the gut-brain axis. I always think that this is very important when we're talking about mental health. Healthy brain function is dependent on a healthy microbiome for proper neurotransmitter production and therefore a healthy nervous system. The central nervous system and the enteric nervous system, which is the nervous system we have in our gut, not only communicate, but can impart positive and negative effects on each other. So an example would be if you're incredibly stressed out, lots of people either can have an overactive digestive system and have to use the restroom more, or maybe they get constipated. And that is the nervous systems having an effect on each other. And part of this communication involves the gut microbiome. And communication is dependent on neurotransmitters that relay signals. And the neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, are products of essential amino acids. Again, essential amino acids you have to get through your diet. So phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan are essential amino acids. Tyrosine converts to dopamine and norepinephrine, and tryptophan is a precursor for serotonin. And 90% of our serotonin is produced in the gut. And decreased serotonin levels are associated with increased impulsivity, aggression, anxiety, stress, and depression, and decreased mood, learning, and cognition. The microbes that are involved with neurotransmitter production are referred to as psychobiotics and are often used in targeted probiotic therapy. I think it's also important to mention that some of the medications that our kids can take, antidepressants, maybe anticonvulsants or anti-anxiety medication, if they have some chronic health issues, anti-diabetics, can cause some nutrient depletions. So that's something to look at when looking at their nutrient status. I also, I have to like, I have to, so I have to kind of make a little bit of a disclaimer that I would not recommend running out and like if you feel like your child is maybe deficient in a particular nutrient, not to run out and supplement. We don't know how it will affect their medications. We don't know if it's necessary. So it's best to talk to your doctor about your concerns or a nutrition professional, or preferably both. So in a little bit of a mental break and transition, that was a lot of information, and I'd like to transition into the behavioral part of this. So I'm going to start with, what is your favorite food? It can be more than one. I know I have more than one. Awesome. And what is your favorite food memory? It can be something from childhood, it can be something from college, it could be something from a week ago. Holidays, lots of holidays, family. Wonderful. And nice. Okay, so a lot of things surrounding family and how has this memory shaped your relationship with food? Comfort. Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to comfort. Family, safety. So that's interesting. So some people have really good formed relationships with their food based on their experiences. And some people maybe didn't feel, maybe their food experience wasn't as positive. And so the relationship with food is different. And so if we have such strong, if our relationships with food are either very positive or negative, we can imagine if our kids have had very negative experiences with food and their memory of food is negative, their relationship with the food is going to be very challenged. And feeding challenges can lead to nutritional insufficiencies or deficiencies or chronic health conditions. So if you have a child who eats maybe 5 items of food that are all tan, they may have some nutritional insufficiencies or deficiencies. Or maybe if you have a child who binge eats a lot, and that can lead to chronic health conditions like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension in the future. Fun question, can a child be overweight and obese and malnourished? Yes, everyone knows this. That's right, because we're overweight, extra body weight is an issue of caloric intake versus out. It doesn't talk about what the nutrients they're taking in are. So you can take in a lot of high calorie foods that are really nutrient depleted and be malnourished. So nutrition status can either add to or decrease allostatic load. We can add fuel to the fire or we can calm the fire. What are some reasons children in foster care may experience food anxieties? Lack of food? Sure. Inconsistency? Unfamiliar food? Yeah. Overabundance of junk food? Sure. Never knowing when you're going to get it again? Yeah. Convenience store junk is easier to get. Having to steal? Absolutely. Or even punitive restriction by a caretaker. So nutrition status will improve when our food-related beliefs are addressed. So if our experiences are negative and our food-related beliefs are negative, we're not going to be able to address the food issue until we can create safety regarding that food-related belief. So adverse childhood experiences predispose foster children to unhealthy food-related behaviors. What are some unhealthy food-related behaviors we might see in our kids? We've got a list here, but I'm sure it goes on and on. So we might see binge eating. I think that's a common, hoarding or stealing food. Food refusal or extreme pickiness. We can get into eating disorders, diagnosable eating disorders, or eating from the garbage or stealing food when you have food available. Like the food one time that, yeah. And what are some health risks we might see? We talked about nutritional deficiencies and how that affects growth, development, and delays and behavior. We talked about type 2 diabetes, underweight, stunting, chronic illness, dental loss. Yes, absolutely. Hypoglycemia. What about the stigma of being overweight and obese? That's a mental health risk. Vision issues. Absolutely. I think an important statistic is that 2.9% of foster youth have bulimia, which is over 7 times higher than the general population. So this is obviously a very prominent and important issue with our community. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but I put it here for a reason. And that's because when we have a behavior that we, would like our child to have, um, we have to look through all the steps we need to go through to get to that change. And we can't get to all those steps to implement even starting to change the behavior until we look at their beliefs and expectations, feelings and emotions, and beliefs about control. And how do we address those issues? How do we address at the foundation? Does anyone have any ideas? Maybe through connecting, responsive feeding. Many children in care have not experienced responsive parenting, let alone responsive feeding. So we will have to connect and create a safe space for them to teaching to cook. Yeah, absolutely. And create a space for them where they feel comfortable and safe, accepting and trusting that parental nurturing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, pick your battles, let it go. Absolutely. Um, and responsive feeding has been associated with improved food-related behaviors and nutritional status. So improved interactions surrounding food, our food experiences, support the child's sense of control. So our behavioral interventions have to be child-centered. So we talked about connection and responsive. Yeah, healthier. Yeah, absolutely. Instead of taking away, just add in. They have to be child-centered, and we have to work with our children in the appropriate stage. And what that means is that the changes in stages are not always linear. So one day, somebody had talked about, mentioned before, one day they eat broccoli and one day they don't. And we have to accept that that's part of the process. And that as soon as we trust the process, they will trust the process. So in an ideal world, obviously this would be perfect, but we all know anybody who's tried to change a behavior, whether it's quit smoking, start exercising or eat healthy or whatever big behavior change, knows that it's all over the place and it looks more like this. We are gung-ho, we go forward, we go backwards, and if you add trauma into that, it can look even more chaotic. And to just be able to sit with your kid and support them through that process. So we know what responsive feeding looks like with an infant. When they cry, we feed them. When they pull away, oh yeah, take them shopping and let them help plan. That's great. We stop feeding them. And responsive feeding is basically just reading their cues and responding in a timely manner. But what does that look like with an older child? What would responsive feeding look like if you had a 4, 6, 10, 14-year-old, maybe a 16-year-old? I'm not sure if people are typing. Oh, there we go. Yeah, having food readily accessible. Absolutely. That food's always there. There's not a concern. Um, Responding to verbal or nonverbal cues, like reading your kids, reading, if predicting a need, if somebody is cranky at the same time every day and you're convinced it's because their blood sugar is low, predict that 10 minutes earlier, give them a snack. Bowl of healthy fruits on the kitchen table, absolutely. What about respecting their right to say no? Giving them the autonomy to say they don't feel like it. When we were talking about one week they ate something and the next week they don't. Replacement options, absolutely. Um, Also offering foods they like. Yes, but explain how food. Yeah, depending on age, you can absolutely talk about their body and how a certain food might help. Absolutely. Um, and and offering foods there. If you have a child who maybe eats very limited foods and you want to expand their the foods that they're taking in, offer the foods they like as well as the foods that you want them to eat without the expectation that they're going to eat it, because the idea is we want to normalize and um, make that not you don't want the food to be a negative. You don't want it to be something that is a fight. You want it to be something that's just there, and we all eat it. And we do that by modeling. We eat the food, and they either eat it or they don't. No battle. That's right. Offer but don't push. So, what doesn't responsive feeding look like? Yeah, absolutely. Five, yes, five more bites, bite counting. That is not responsive feeding. Forcing them to finish the meal. Does anybody know why? Is that because we're not making connection, right? We're not making a healthy connection. If you don't, yes, punitive consequences for not finishing their food. That is not creating healthy connections at all. Going to bed early, right? Hates everything. Not respecting their body signs. Yes, absolutely. Because we want them to listen to their bodies. And if we're not going to respect that, we're not teaching them what we want them to learn. Um, what about counting calories? If you have some, at least I've heard of, some people who have children with a bigger body might, what, yeah, might count calories because with good intentions, um, but counting calories does not create healthy connections and can further trauma. So if our beliefs and perceptions are what drive food behaviors, the brain views calorie counting as restriction. So, and researchers found that the mere perception of restriction is enough to trigger overeating. So, if you have a child who maybe uses food as comfort or tends to overeat or hoard food, you may be perpetuating that behavior unintentionally. So, ultimately, healthy connection is more important than the food, which I know I just spent the first part of this talking about how important the nutrients are for nervous system function and development, but we're not going to get there until I have a child who's a picky eater. Yeah, yep. Um, but we can't get to the behavior until we make the healthy connection. So, how do we create a safe space? We know behavior change is unpredictable and that we must feel safe first. So, how do we, as caretakers, create a safe space in relation to food and food behaviors? Mhm. Yeah, I always think it's interesting. I The use of the word control, I think, is always very interesting because it is true. They are trying to grasp at control of their life, of their personal body, their space, everything that they don't have control over. But I always feel like as caretakers, especially if we're stressed out or triggered in some way, the word control can create a conflicted environment. So if we're feeling out of control and we need control and our child is out of control, then instead of us understanding there's a struggle there, we may feel like, oh, they're just trying to manipulate or be in control of the situation. I'm the parent, they need to listen to me. And so that's just one thing I think about. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the, in terms of creating safe space, separating our own triggers from the situation, our own trauma around food, our own beliefs around food and maybe body size, around nutrition, etc. Um, Eat small and not nourished. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can be a big trigger for a lot of people. I know when I get stressed out with my kids, it's usually after they haven't eaten well for quite a bit. And then I feel really pressured for them to eat the broccoli or whatnot. And that's, yeah, it's a trigger. Um, so I would also say maybe separating the trauma behavior from the child. And I think it's more specifically like hoarding behaviors or stealing or um, behaviors that they might get in trouble for, because that can lead to shame. And because this is their coping mechanism, we don't want to take away their safety blanket, right? You may have texture. Yes, exactly. Exactly. It could be texture. And you have to look at sensory processing. But um, back to lessening the shame, this is their safety blanket. We wouldn't, if our 3-year-old is in crisis, we're not going to take their blanket or their lovey away when that is what's keeping them centered. So in the same way, we don't want to necessarily take away our kids' safety blanket. We just need to work with them on a way to keep it in a healthy place, like not keeping perishables in your room. Meet nutritional needs in a way that the child will accept. Yes. Ensure drinks. Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with, yep, an offering. And the more, if you can sneak food in or you can offer ensure, then not eating the broccoli at dinner isn't a big deal. And then that just becomes normal and not a big deal at all for anybody. Um, so according to Charlie Slaughter, he wrote Hungry for Love, and I recommend that book, and adding kid-friendly recipes. Absolutely. Yeah. Make them a part of it. Give them some control and autonomy. Um, so according to Charlie Slaughter, 4 things are fed by the caretaker at mealtime, and that's love, care, connection, followed by food, and food is last. And food is last because we can't get to the food, and food is not the most important thing. It's the ability for our children to feel safe accepting that love, care, and connection. And then we can get to the food. Um, so can anybody give some examples of how, I mean, we have had some examples, but how trauma shows up around meals for your family? Hard time physically sitting, yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually getting to dinner. Yeah, that's a good one. Falling apart emotionally equals not feeling peaceful to eat. And it disrupts the whole family meal. Absolutely. So, what are some ways that you currently, um, what are some approaches you use for these behaviors? Yes, being hyper aware of what everyone else has to be sure they don't have more. Taste. Yep. Giving him the choice to eat if he doesn't want to. Yeah. Dinner became story time for their day. That's the feeling. Um, Feeling of hunger and thirst. They have a hard time hearing their hunger and thirst cues or listening to their full cues. Eating picnic style in the living room. That's awesome. Hearing their hunger cues. Yeah, absolutely. I have some books at the end of this that I recommend if you're interested in this that address a lot of these, listening to hunger cues and whatnot. Um, so the takeaway from this is that behavior is almost never about the food, it's about the trauma. And creating healthy connection through responsive feeding is the first step towards helping our children create relationships with food that promote long-term health. Um, these are some of the recommended readings that I'm adding. I think I was told I could upload the slides for everybody, so you'll have access to this information. Um, these are great reading. Ellen Satter Institute does a lot of responsive feeding, and especially for teens. This is a great book at listening to your body cues. And Elise Resch co-authored Intuitive Eating with Evelyn Tribbley, who pretty much started that. And then I also have my references. Uh, this is it for me. I don't know if anybody has any questions or. I have not read that, but that is on my list. Thank you. Vitamins for kids. Are you talking multivitamins or targeted vitamins, meaning like a single vitamin? Multi. I think for the most part, multis are fine because they tend to be lower because they're covering a full spectrum. The ones I tend to steer clear from, if you're not talking with a professional, is the target, like the single ones, because they're just a concentrated dose. If you in your that you can ask for a nutrition panel, and they'll look at vitamin D, calcium, B12. There's a whole. If you ask your doctor for a nutrient panel, they should be able to. Um, thank you. Supplements. I took the condition because of specific trauma my child went through. Yeah, it's depending on the child and their, again, we were talking about medications. Some vitamins can have interactions, some supplements, um, some foods. I mean, if you're on an MAOI, you can't eat tyramine. I'm curious. Does anybody have? Proper care. Do you know what? If that is ever reversible damage? I mean, I guess it depends on how long. It's a hard question to answer because I don't have labs. I don't have a full story because I don't know how long. Um, Timer? No, know what that means. Watch. I hid veggies and sauce. Yes, you can hide them in sausage. You can hide them in meatloaf. Make zucchini bread. You can put them in smoothies. The child has one to eat. A fun time to watch. Oh, I see. To get them into a rhythm. Um, my only concern about that would be, are we teaching them to eat on a time, or are we teaching them to listen to their body cues? Working on ways to maybe at mealtime, maybe listening to um, like prior to snack or meal, like talking to them about their body, like how's your tummy feel? How are you feeling energy? Are you tired? Are you cranky? You know, talking to them about how they feel physically. And then when they're done, oh, are you full? Is your tummy full? How does it feel? When my first son started eating, Thomas started in the carrot room. Oh, yeah, and finding support in your community and from your family and friends. Absolutely. Well, are there any more questions? I'm sorry, went a little short. I talked really fast.
No, it was a wonderful presentation, Grace. I don't know if we touched upon, yes, Devin at the top said, if a kid refuses to eat anything other than junk food, do you just wait it out while being empathetic, or do you try to have the, or do you enable having the junk food, or do you try to negotiate? And so I think people are hoping maybe that we could touch on that a little bit if possible.
Absolutely. I do not recommend taking food away from children, like not providing the junk food if it's something that they prefer, because that's a form of restriction. And as we talked about before, restriction can lead to disordered eating behaviors. So what I would do in a situation, depending how old are they? I think that also really depends on how you would approach it. I would definitely offer them, the food if it's that's the word, the food, like if it's chips or something, say here you can have some Doritos and an apple. Just offer other foods in tandem with it, so that we're getting in the nutrition, but they're also getting that food that they enjoy. We don't want to torture them. It takes time. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Thoughts on helping people with frustration around stuffing, like overeating and food and hoarding? Yeah. Um, I would say looking at their triggers. What is triggering you and interfering with building that connection? And once we look at that, then we can start thinking of approaches that would be helpful. But isn't eating a lot of junk food a form of disordered eating? Yes. I mean, if you're talking about binge eating, yes. But like we said, we're not going to get to the behavior change until we create a place where they're comfortable. So again, depending on the age, I feel like the older a child is, the more we can talk about food and how, certain nutrients help your body with certain things. But younger kids, I think it's really just, offering what they like and offering the healthy food and working on that connection first and trusting the process. You have to trust the process, because if you don't trust it, they're going to sense that and they're not going to trust it either. Why would they? And we have I have experience with that process with our when we had a little boy who literally ate 5 items. He ate canned mac and cheese, applesauce, toast, buttered noodles, and did I say chicken nuggets? He ate 5 very basic items, and it took a really long time of just offering food. And instead, we didn't force him to eat it, but we'd say, hey, do you want to at least try it? And if he said no, he said no. And eventually he would say, okay. And we say, okay. And he's like, well, how much? And he's like, well, how much do you want to try? And so he'd try this tiny itty bitty little nibble. And to me, that's victory, because at least he tried it. So the idea is it's going to take time. It takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. But if you trust that over time, things will improve, they will. And eventually he did. He would eat the broccoli. He put pasta sauce on his noodles. He started eating pizza. So he opened up. We just have to work with them. We have to meet them where they're at, right? We have to meet them whatever stage they're at in that stage of change, and be there with them, not where we need them to be. Dr. Rao talks about even naming it junk. Yes, good food versus bad food. That's right. Yeah, because food isn't bad. Yeah, continual reassuring with love. Mhm. Did I answer the question about frustration? I'm not sure if I answered what you were looking for. I feel like I talked about it, but I'm not sure if I really answered what you wanted. Are there any more questions at all? Here. Yes, it does take time, and their frustration gets high. Yeah, understandably. Um, you worry about the place. You worry about, in terms of the placement, you worry about that they won't want to keep the child because of the behavior. I always ask my kids to try a no thank you bite. That's that's a great approach. Yeah, so they're try it. They're allowed to say no. No thank you bite. Yeah, and that's a victory, because at least they've tried it. Even if the try is that they don't like it, at least we know they don't like it. I make a meal at dinner time, and at least a few kids will say they hate it and refuse to eat it. Yeah, yep, that is so in a that I imagine that is a very common situation, especially in our community, because we tend to have a lot of different kids. Um, and in that situation, I would say, they can eat what they want from dinner, and then after, if it's not something that if it's something they refuse to eat, maybe they can have an apple or something afterwards, or some other snack after. But it does get really complicated when you have multiple kids because what's fair, what's not fair. But one of, I don't even remember who it was, one of my trainings for foster parenting, one of the women who ran it had a really great expression, and it was that fair is not equal, it's what's right for that child. And I love it because it's so true. I use it with my kids all the time too. It's, you really have to do what's right for each child, and it's not going to look the same for everyone at the table.
And I think we maybe have a hand raised. Kimberly, do you have a hand raised at the top there?
I do. Can you hear me? It seems like I'm a little frozen.
I can hear you. Hi.
Okay, yes. My video seems a little weird. Hi. So I just wanted to bring a couple things in. One was my daughter was adopted at 5 months old, and she was actually being fed an excessive amount of food and left to sit, and she couldn't raise her head from her shoulder, and she just had kind of rolls of, she was just being overfed and undercared for. She was in foster care. And I brought down her formula amount right away. She didn't really cry for food, and she was lifting her head within a couple days, but I think that was an early experience. Food was comfort. Food was comfort. Food was the only comfort. So she has a lot of issues with hoarding, sneaking, hiding, wrappers, stuffed places. If I didn't buy anything sweet, she would eat sugar out of the sugar bowl. If I didn't buy anything that was just empty calorie snack food, she would find a similar kind of odd replacement. So we used to be at war with it many years ago. She's 15 now, and I would, say, "What are you doing?" Or I was more confrontational about it, and I guess it would be extreme to say I was criminalizing it, but I'm sure from her vantage point, it seemed like,
right,
what the hell's the matter with you? Why are you doing that? You can't do that. So when I lifted that response to her eating, we connected, and we hadn't bonded yet. And that was years ago. She was probably 10, I guess. I'm going to guess it was 5 years ago. It was a huge difference for our relationship overall.
Yeah.
I can't even express the amount of impact it had, because I was looking down on her and I was judging her in so many ways. She's a brown girl. I'm judging her body. I felt like I was, in retrospect, and even just talking about it now, I see like I'm invading her space. She's eating to live, and she's a child, but like there were just so many things connected to my attitude towards her issues with eating. And I don't even want to call them issues because it sounds like I'm judging it. So I still need to work on it. I'm not always great. I said
nobody is. None of us are.
Yeah, and I said to her the other day, if I didn't buy anything sweet, you'd eat a teaspoon of sugar, and we're kind of laughing about it, but there's still judgment there. There's still a criticism instead of saying, hey, what would help? Or how do you want to do this? So I've learned through so many situations I've been in my own life with my kids, all kinds of work I've done on myself, is that asking questions of the other person is often a great go-to. If you can't access, like, what am I supposed to be doing again? How am I supposed to ask the child a question, because they feel seen, they feel heard. If I say, hey, is this working for you? Or how do you feel after you eat a pint of ice cream? Did that bother you? Without judgment. The question has to be without judgment.
Curiosity, absolutely.
Curiosity. So I just wanted to bring that in, and also that I have my own weird behaviors with eating, and
most of us do, and we bring it to the table, and that's I applaud you for like recognizing that and taking steps, because clearly it's worked, and all of us have, I don't think there's a person in this Zoom meeting who doesn't have some either trauma or maybe disordered skew based on, I mean, we're taught certain things just from growing up socially of what's right and wrong and what a healthy body looks like and what an unhealthy body looks like and what good and bad food is and how much you should eat. So I don't think there's anybody, and I think when you can sit with that and realize that, that's when you take steps like you took, where you say, oh, okay, this isn't working. What works for you? How are you feeling? And connect and making that connection. Starting with connection. Absolutely.